Zarthok adjusted his thermal cloaking device one final time and gazed down at the pathetic blue-green marble spinning below his ship. Earth, the so-called cradle of humanity. According to the Dominion Empire's intelligence reports, this world was inhabited by soft, weak bipedal creatures who had barely figured out faster-than-light travel and still used something called money to trade resources. Easy prey. Computer, analyze target species weaknesses, he commanded in his native tongue, which sounded like gravel being stirred in a blender. Species designation: human exhibits standard mammalian vulnerabilities. Limited sensory range, slow reflexes, fragile bone structure. Recommended hunting approach: standard predator protocols should suffice. Zarthok's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. This would be simple. Back home on Veltar Prime, he was considered the greatest hunter of his generation. His trophy room contained the preserved heads of apex predators from 17 different worlds, including the legendary phase stalkers of Nexus 7 and the quantum-shifting void cats of the Andromeda Spiral. Humans? They would be a pleasant vacation. Down on Earth, Jake Martinez was having the kind of morning that made him question his life choices. Not in a deep philosophical way, mind you, but in the very specific way that involves cleaning up after tourists who apparently believed that leave no trace meant leave everything exactly where it falls, especially the sticky stuff. Day 347 of reminding grown adults that bears are not oversized dogs, then Jake muttered to himself as he collected yet another abandoned S-Morias kit from Yellowstone's backcountry. His ranger uniform was already decorated with pine sap, mystery stains, and what he really hoped was just chocolate. Jake was the kind of guy who looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for generic Park Ranger number 3. Average height, brown hair that defied styling, and the sort of forgettable face that made him excellent at his job because tourists felt comfortable asking him where the bathrooms were located 17 times per day. What the tourists didn't know, and what the Dominion Empire's intelligence reports had completely missed, was that Jake had spent 8 years in wilderness survival training before taking this job. Not by choice, mind you. His parents had been the kind of outdoor enthusiasts who thought character was built through extended exposure to mosquitoes and questionable water sources. As Jake reached for his thermos of coffee, the one thing standing between him and a complete mental breakdown, something shimmered in his peripheral vision. He paused, squinting at the tree line. Nothing there. It must have been heat distortion, even though it was barely 60 degrees. 50 feet away, Zarthok nearly purred with anticipation. His optical camouflage was working perfectly. The human hadn't even noticed him. This was almost too easy. He raised his plasma rifle, a weapon that could punch through 6 inches of reinforced titanium, and took careful aim. That's when Jake's radio crackled to life with the voice of his supervisor, Linda, who sounded like she gargled with gravel and disappointment every morning. Martinez, we've got another genius who tried to pet a bison. Need you at the visitor center ASAP. Jake sighed and started jogging toward his truck, but completely unaware that his sudden movement had caused an 8-foot-tall alien death machine to curse in 17 different languages as his shot went wide, vaporizing a perfectly innocent pine cone instead. Zarthok stared at the smoldering vegetation, his confidence taking its first tiny dent. No matter. The human was simply more mobile than expected. He activated his tracking protocols and began following Jake's heat signature, his advanced sensors painting a perfect 3-dimensional map of the human's movement patterns. The sensors, designed to track the most cunning predators in the galaxy, somehow failed to account for Jake's complete inability to walk in a straight line. The human seemed to move in a bizarre zigzag pattern, stopping randomly to pick up trash, adjust his hat, or stare at birds like he'd never seen them before. Fascinating, Zarthok muttered, recalibrating his targeting systems for the 3rd time. The creature appears to be employing advanced evasion techniques. Jake, meanwhile, was employing the advanced technique of trying not to trip over his own feet while thinking about whether he'd remembered to turn off his coffee maker. Zarthok decided to get creative. If long-range elimination wouldn't work, he'd simply decloak and challenge the human to honorable combat. After all, what could a soft, technology-dependent mammal possibly do against 8 feet of engineered killing machine? He materialized directly in Jake's path, plasma rifle lowered but ready, his armored form gleaming in the afternoon sun. His voice translator kicked in as he spoke the ritual words of challenge. "Human creature, I am Zarthok of the VL-Tar hunting caste. You have been selected as..." That's when the sprinkler system turned on. Jake's first instinct wasn't fear, confusion, or even curiosity about the large, apparently costumed individual blocking his path. His first instinct was annoyance, because the sprinklers weren't supposed to activate until evening, and now he'd have to fill out a maintenance request. "Oh, come on," Jake groaned, getting thoroughly soaked. "Not today, please." Zarthok, meanwhile, was discovering that his species' advanced technology had one tiny, overlooked flaw. It wasn't waterproof. Not against Earth water, anyway, said, which apparently contained enough dissolved minerals and random pollutants to interfere with alien electronics in ways that made absolutely no sense. His optical camouflage began flickering like a broken neon sign. His thermal vision went haywire. And his voice translator started hiccuping, turning his intimidating death threats into something that sounded like a malfunctioning GPS giving directions to someone who didn't speak English. "Human creature, you have been selected as recalculating. Turn left in 50 feet. Worthy prey for the great. Please insert coin to continue. Hunt of honor." Jake finally looked up from his soggy clipboard and noticed the large, flickering individual having what appeared to be a very public nervous breakdown. "Hey buddy, you okay? The Renaissance Fair isn't until next month and I think your costume's shorting out." That's when Dr. Emma Voss chose to jog past on her daily run. Emma was the kind of scientist who'd gotten into xenobiology because she was tired of studying Earth creatures that made sense. She had a PhD from MIT, a black belt in sarcasm, and absolutely zero patience for anything that wasted her time. She stopped dead in her tracks, pulled out her phone, and started recording. "Well, that's new," she said with the sort of calm that only came from years of expecting the universe to be weird and disappointing in equal measure. Zarthok's situation deteriorated rapidly. The sprinklers had attracted a flock of very territorial geese who apparently viewed large, the shiny intruders as either a threat to their nesting area or a really interesting new playground toy. As they began honking and flapping around him, his motion sensors went completely insane, interpreting the geese as multiple high-speed projectiles approaching from all directions. His automated defense systems kicked in, which meant his suit began producing a high-pitched whining sound while rotating him in circles, trying to target everything at once. He looked like a very dangerous, very expensive spinning top that had gained sentience and immediately regretted it. Jake, being a park ranger and therefore professionally obligated to deal with wildlife disturbances, approached the situation with the sort of confident cluelessness that had gotten him through most of his career. "Easy there, big guy. Let's just calm down and..." He reached out to pat Zarthok on what he assumed was a shoulder, triggering the alien's proximity alarms. Zarthok's suit interpreted the gesture as an attack and activated its emergency protocols, which involved releasing a cloud of paralytic gas that was designed to incapacitate most carbon-based life forms. Unfortunately, Jake had been exposed to so much pepper spray during his law enforcement training, so many industrial cleaning chemicals during his maintenance work, and so much concentrated tourist body spray during summer seasons, that his respiratory system had basically given up and developed an immunity to everything. He sneezed once and kept talking. "There we go. You know, you've got some really impressive special effects there. The fog machine is a nice touch. Very dramatic." Zarthok stared at the human in growing horror. His paralytic gas, capable of dropping a charging Nexus Rhino in its tracks, had been defeated by what appeared to be seasonal allergies. Emma finished uploading the video to her social media with the caption, "Either someone's budget for cosplay has gotten ridiculous, or my Tuesday just got a lot more interesting." Taking bets in the comments, she pocketed her phone and walked over to Jake, who was still trying to help their visitor with what he assumed was a malfunctioning costume. "Jake, I don't suppose you've considered the possibility that your new friend here isn't from around here?" "What do you mean? He's probably from Denver. Maybe Boulder. They get really into their hobbies down there." "I mean, he's not from around here geographically, temporally, or dimensionally." Jake looked at Emma, then at Zarthok, who had finally managed to shut off his malfunctioning systems and was now standing very still, apparently hoping that if he didn't move, this nightmare would end. "You're saying he's an alien?" "I'm saying he's an alien with what appears to be military-grade equipment who materialized out of thin air 30 seconds before challenging you to combat. So either we're dealing with first contact, or someone has way too much money and way too little common sense." Jake considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, either way, he's blocking the path to the visitor center, and I've still got that bison situation to deal with." 20 minutes later, they'd relocated to the maintenance shed, where Jake kept his emergency supplies and Emma had set up an impromptu first contact protocol that consisted mainly of coffee and aggressive note-taking. Zarthok sat on an overturned bucket, looking like a very expensive lawn ornament that had achieved sentience and immediately regretted it. "So, let me get this straight," Jake said, pouring coffee from a thermos that had seen better decades. "You came here to hunt humans because your computer told you we'd be easy prey." Zarthok's translator had finally stabilized enough to produce coherent sentences, though it still occasionally hiccuped and inserted random phrases from what sounded like a cooking show. "The Dominion Intelligence Corps rated your species as Class 7 non-threatening. Standard mammalian weaknesses, primitive technology, predictable behavioral patterns. You were supposed to be, add salt to taste, simple quarry." Emma looked up from her notes. "Class 7 non-threatening? What's Class 1? The void krakens of Proxima Centauri. They can consume entire starships and exist partially outside normal space-time. And you thought we'd be easier to hunt than cosmic squid monsters." The report seemed very thorough. That's when Tommy Wilson chose to walk in, carrying a toolbox and wearing the expression of someone who'd given up on the universe making sense around the same time the Cubs won the World Series. Tommy was built like a fire hydrant with arms and had the sort of engineering background that made him dangerous to small electronics and large egos. He'd served 2 tours as a military engineer before discovering that the private sector paid better and involved significantly fewer explosions. Usually, he took one look at the scene, set down his toolbox, and pulled out a flask. "It's Tuesday, right? Just checking, because this looks like the kind of thing that happens to me on Fridays." "Tommy, meet Zarthok. He's an alien hunter who came to Earth expecting easy prey," Emma explained. Tommy studied Zarthok with the critical eye of someone who'd spent years figuring out why things didn't work the way they were supposed to. "That explains the costume. Very impressive. Did you build the electronics package yourself, or did you buy it from one of those fancy special effects companies?" "I am not wearing a costume. I am a Veltar warrior, trained in the ancient arts of..." "Yeah, okay, look, pal, I don't care if you're from Mars or Milwaukee. What I care about is that Jake says you challenged him to some kind of death match, and Jake's the guy who brings donuts to our staff meetings. So we're going to have a problem." Zarthok was beginning to understand that his intelligence reports might have contained some significant omissions. These humans weren't cowering in fear or begging for mercy. They were offering him coffee and critiquing his equipment like he was a poorly designed appliance. "Perhaps we could reach some kind of arrangement," he suggested carefully. "I could simply report that Earth's dominant species proved more challenging than anticipated." Or, Jake said, Because he was the kind of person who saw problems as opportunities for creative solutions, we could show you exactly how challenging we can be. That's how Earth's first alien visitor found himself subjected to what humans apparently called team-building exercises, but which felt suspiciously like psychological warfare. Tommy had disappeared into his workshop and returned with an arsenal of improvised weapons that violated several laws of physics and at least 3 Geneva Convention provisions. Jake contributed his extensive knowledge of local wildlife behavior patterns. Emma provided running commentary and Liv tweeted the entire experience. Their first demonstration involved something Tommy called the marshmallow cannon, which launched sticky projectiles with enough force to seriously dent Zarthok's armor. When the alien tried to activate his energy shields, Jake casually mentioned that they were standing near a natural gas line, which made directed energy weapons a potentially explosive mistake. Your species fights with confectionery projectiles? Zarthok asked, trying to clean marshmallow residue out of his sensor array. We fight with whatever's handy, Tommy explained, loading another round. That's the thing your intelligence reports missed. We don't have standard combat protocols. We make it up as we go along. The second demonstration involved bear spray, fishing line, and a motion-activated sprinkler system that Tommy had rigged to activate whenever anything large and metallic entered the testing area. Zarthok's advanced armor, designed to deflect plasma rifles and molecular disruptors, proved remarkably vulnerable to pressurized capsaicin and unexpected water features. "This is not possible," he gasped, stumbling through a cloud of pepper spray while water cannons tracked his movement with mechanical precision. "Your technology is primitive. Your weapons are improvised. This should not be effective." "Yeah, that's kind of the point," Jake said, taking notes for what he was already planning to turn into a very interesting incident report. "See, the thing about humans is that we don't really believe in fighting fair. We believe in fighting to win." By the time they'd finished their demonstration, Zarthok was soaking wet, covered in marshmallow residue, temporarily blinded by pepper spray, and beginning to suspect that the Dominion Intelligence Corps might need to update their threat assessment procedures. "I believe I am beginning to understand why the Galactic Council listed your world as under review in their territorial expansion databases," he admitted. Emma paused in her note-taking. "We're under review for territorial expansion?" "Oh yes. Several species have expressed interest in your planet's resources." The Dominion Empire was simply testing the waters, so to speak. Jake, Tommy, and Emma exchanged glances. "Well," Jake said finally, "I guess we'd better make sure they get an accurate report." 40-8 hours later, Zarthok was seriously reconsidering his career choices. What had started as a simple hunting expedition had turned into something that his warrior's code had no protocols for handling. The humans weren't just defeating him, they were making him feel stupid while they did it. His distress call had brought Commander Velnara, his immediate superior and a hunter so legendary that she had her own entry in the Dominion military archives. She was also 8.5 feet of titanium-reinforced bone and muscle, with enough firepower built into her armor to level a small city. "Explain to me again how 3 primitive mammals have rendered you combat ineffective," she growled through the communication link. "They are not primitive, Commander. They are unusual. Their combat doctrine appears to be based on chaos theory and weaponized randomness." Nonsense. All carbon-based life forms follow predictable patterns. "I am deploying to your location." That conversation took place while Jake was giving Emma and Tommy a crash course in alien psychology, based on what he'd learned from 3 days of accidentally terrorizing a professional killer. See, the thing is, they're hunters, right? They're used to prey that follows rules. Zebras run in straight lines. Gazelles move in herds. Even their apex predators probably have some kind of logical behavior pattern. "So we're going to be illogical?" Emma asked. "We're going to be aggressively human," Jake corrected. Which, from their perspective, is the same thing. Tommy had been busy with his own projects, which involved converting most of the park's maintenance equipment into what he cheerfully called alien-proofing devices. The visitor center now looked like it had been designed by someone who'd seen too many action movies and had unlimited access to a hardware store. When Commander Velnara's ship landed in the parking lot, she was greeted by what appeared to be a standard Earth defensive installation: motion sensor lights, security cameras, and a small sign that read "Welcome to Yellowstone. Please keep your spacecraft on designated landing areas." She materialized in full combat gear, weapons charged and ready, expecting to find Zarthok's remains and 3 terrified humans cowering behind whatever primitive shelter they could construct. Instead, she found Zarthok sitting in a lawn chair wearing a baseball cap that read "I survived human contact," and holding what appeared to be a frozen beverage with a small paper umbrella in it. Zarthok. Report. Commander, I respectfully suggest that we reconsider our assessment of local threat levels. Explain. That's when the sound system Tommy had rigged up began playing what he called psychological warfare music, which turned out to be a collection of human songs specifically chosen to be as annoying as possible. Somewhere in the mix were several boy band hits, at least 3 polka songs, and what sounded like someone playing a kazoo version of classical music. Velnara's advanced hearing, designed to detect the smallest sounds that might indicate prey or predator, was suddenly overwhelmed by what her audio processors kept classifying as aggressive noise of unknown purpose. "What is that sound?" she demanded. "That," Jake said, appearing from behind a conveniently placed tree, "is what we call psychological warfare. Also, Weird Al Yankovic. He's a human musician who specializes in musical comedy." Emma emerged from the visitor center, still carrying her clipboard and looking like she was conducting the world's weirdest scientific study. "Commander Velnara, I presume. We've been expecting you. Zarthok mentioned you might be stopping by." Velnara looked around the area, her tactical sensors painting a 3-dimensional map of potential threats and weak points. What they found instead was the most confusing defensive setup she'd ever encountered. The humans had apparently fortified their position using camping equipment, children's playground toys, and what appeared to be industrial kitchen appliances. Her threat assessment software kept crashing because it couldn't categorize inflatable bouncy castle rigged with motion sensors, or weaponized automatic pancake flipper. "Your defensive positions make no tactical sense," she observed. "That's kind of the point," Tommy said, appearing from what she now realized was a camouflaged maintenance tunnel. "If we can't figure out what we're doing, how are you supposed to predict it?" Velnara raised her plasma rifle, a weapon that had never failed to intimidate prey species into submission. Jake held up a small device that looked suspiciously like a garage door opener. "Before you do anything hasty, Commander, you should know that Tommy's rigged the entire area with what he calls surprise dispensers. We're not entirely sure what they all do, but Tommy has a very creative imagination and access to a lot of surplus camping gear." Emma consulted her notes. "Also, the local wildlife is currently experiencing what we call mating season, which means the bears, elk, and bison are all extremely territorial and prone to attacking anything they perceive as a threat. Jake's very good at making sure they perceive things as threats." Velnara was beginning to understand Zarthok's predicament. These humans weren't just using unconventional tactics, they were using incomprehensible tactics. Her military training had prepared her for everything from siege warfare to zero-gravity combat, but it had never covered scenarios involving weaponized park management or aggressive musical comedy. "What do you want?" she asked finally. Jake smiled the kind of smile that had gotten him through 8 years of wilderness survival training and 12 years of dealing with tourists who thought no feeding the bears was merely a suggestion. "Well, Commander, I think we need to have a conversation about your species expansion plans. See, Emma here is a xenobiologist, and she has some very interesting questions about your intelligence gathering methods." The conversation that followed would later be classified in Dominion military records as First Contact Psychological Warfare Incident 001 and required 17 different xenopsychologists to fully analyze. It started when Emma pulled out her laptop and began what she called her preliminary species assessment interview, which sounded official and scientific until she started asking questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate humanity's scariness? And do you have any allergies to common earth substances like water, oxygen, or gluten? Velnara found herself in the unprecedented position of being studied rather than doing the studying. The humans had somehow reversed the entire power dynamic of First Contact, turning what should have been a conquest into what felt suspiciously like a job interview. Jake, meanwhile, had been busy preparing what he called environmental education, which involved leading the two aliens on a guided tour of exactly why Earth was classified as a death world by most galactic standards. See, the thing about our planet, he explained as they walked through what appeared to be perfectly normal woodland, is that pretty much everything here is either trying to kill you, dissolve you, or eat you. Sometimes all three. He pointed to a perfectly innocent-looking plant. That's poison ivy. Causes severe chemical burns on contact. And that, he gestured to a tree, is oak. The nuts are toxic to most mammalian species. Also, there's probably a black widow spider living in it somewhere. Zarthok's threat assessment software was having a nervous breakdown. His sensors kept identifying new potential hazards every few seconds. Plants that secreted contact poisons, insects with neurotoxic venom, mammals with territorial aggression patterns that defied logical analysis. Your entire ecosystem is hostile, Velnara observed. Not hostile, Jake corrected cheerfully. Competitive. Everything here evolved by learning to survive in an environment where literally everything else is trying to kill it, including us. That's when Tommy's latest innovation made its debut. He'd spent the morning rigging what he called environmental enhancement devices throughout the hiking trail, which meant that their educational tour was accompanied by a series of increasingly ridiculous booby traps designed to demonstrate human engineering principles. The first was a simple rope snare that activated when Velnara stepped on what looked like a solid patch of ground. Her advanced combat reflexes kicked in, allowing her to avoid being tangled, but not before her armor's proximity alarm started shrieking warnings about multiple projectile threats from unknown vectors. The projectiles turned out to be pine cones launched by a trebuchet Tommy had constructed from camping gear and pure spite. Primitive but effective, Emma noted, making marks on her clipboard. Tommy has a degree in mechanical engineering, but his real talent is what we call aggressive problem solving. The second trap involved a motion-activated sprinkler system rigged to spray what Tommy cheerfully called EOD skunk, which was exactly what it sounded like. Velnara's olfactory sensors, designed to track prey across continents, were suddenly overwhelmed by a smell so concentrated and offensive that her armor's life support system automatically sealed itself and began running emergency air filtration protocols. That's actually from a local animal called a skunk, Jake explained. They use scent as a defense mechanism. Very effective. The smell can persist for weeks. Zarthok, who had experienced this particular demonstration the day before, was maintaining a safe distance and trying not to think about the fact that his armor still smelled faintly of industrial-strength tomato sauce. By the time they reached the third trap, which involved a complex arrangement of mirrors, fishing line, and what appeared to be a disco ball, both aliens were jumping at shadows and treating every rustling leaf as a potential threat. The wonderful thing about humans, Emma observed, is that we've had to become creative to survive. Other species evolved claws, armor, venom, or size. We evolved imagination. That's when they encountered the bears. Jake had mentioned earlier that the local grizzly population was entering their most territorial phase. But he hadn't mentioned that he'd spent the morning strategically distributing fish-scented bait to ensure they'd cross paths with a particularly cranky mother bear who had recently given birth to cubs. Velnara's combat training kicked in automatically. She raised her energy weapons, targeting systems locked on the approaching bear. "I wouldn't," Jake said calmly. "It is a simple animal. My weapons can." "Your weapons will make noise. Loud noise, that'll bring the rest of the family. Also, there's a Park Service regulation about discharging energy weapons in protected wildlife areas. The fine is pretty steep."
Emma looked up from her notes. "Also, mama grizzlies are faster than you'd expect, meaner than you'd hope, and have a tendency to hold grudges. Plus, if you hurt her, her cubs will grow up with a really negative impression of large metallic beings. That could be problematic for future diplomatic relations." Velnara stared at the approaching bear, then at Jake, who was calmly pulling out what appeared to be a small air horn and a packet of trail mix. "Watch and learn," Jake said, and proceeded to demonstrate advanced human survival skills, which apparently consisted of making himself look larger, making loud noises, and slowly backing away while talking to the bear in a calm, respectful tone. The bear, after a tense moment of mutual assessment, decided that the strange collection of beings wasn't worth the trouble and ambled away to investigate more interesting smells. "That," Jake said, "putting away the air horn is how you deal with apex predators. You don't fight them unless you absolutely have to. You convince them that you're more trouble than you're worth." Zarthok and Velnara exchanged glances. They were beginning to realize that Jake wasn't just describing bear management strategies. "The thing about humans," Emma added, apparently reading their thoughts, "is that we've spent our entire evolutionary history being smaller, weaker, and less specialized than everything else on our planet. So we got really, really good at making ourselves more trouble than we were worth." That's when Tommy's masterpiece revealed itself. They'd been walking through what appeared to be a normal section of trail, but Tommy had spent the entire morning turning it into what he called psychological warfare central. Motion sensors triggered random sounds from hidden speakers. Harmless but startling spring-loaded mechanisms launched biodegradable confetti at unexpected moments. Carefully placed mirrors created optical illusions that made the forest look like it was full of eyes watching from every shadow. By the time they reached the end of the trail, both aliens were exhibiting clear signs of stress. Their posture was defensive, their weapon systems were on constant alert, and they were treating every unexpected sound or movement as a potential threat. "This is not hunting," Velnara said finally. This is Tuesday," Jake said with a shrug. "Pretty typical day, actually. Emma's got her research, Tommy's got his projects, I've got my rounds. Nothing special." Zarthok made a sound that his translator refused to process, possibly because there wasn't a human equivalent for the existential scream of a predator realizing it has become prey. 3 hours later, they were back at the visitor center, where Emma had set up what she called a post-contact debrief session, and Tommy had prepared what he called diplomatic refreshments, which consisted of coffee, sandwiches, and a selection of human snack foods designed to demonstrate the terrifying diversity of Earth's culinary traditions. Velnara stared at her sandwich with the expression of someone who had given up on the universe making sense and was now just along for the ride. "Explain to me again why you put vegetables between pieces of processed grain and consider it food," she said. "Because it's convenient, tasty, and we can eat it while doing other things," Emma replied, taking notes on alien nutritional psychology. "Humans are very good at multitasking. We evolved to be able to eat, watch for predators, plan for tomorrow, and argue about politics all at the same time." Zarthok had spent the afternoon learning to appreciate human beverages, specifically coffee, which his system processed as a mild stimulant that somehow made everything seem simultaneously more manageable and more absurd. "I need to update my reports," he said eventually. "The Dominion Empire has misconceptions about your species." "What kind of misconceptions?" Jake asked. Zarthok consulted his notes, which had grown considerably more detailed over the past few days. "We classified you as Class 7 non-threatening based on your apparent lack of natural weapons, armor, or enhanced physical capabilities. Our analysts concluded that humans were typical mammalian prey species with rudimentary technology." Tommy nearly choked on his coffee. "Rudimentary technology? You still use combustion engines for transportation." Your computer systems are based on binary processing. Your weapons are primarily projectile-based rather than energy-based. Yeah, but we made all that stuff ourselves, Tommy pointed out, in like a couple hundred years, starting from basically nothing. Emma looked up from her notes. How long did it take your species to develop interstellar travel? Approximately 4,000 years once we achieved basic metallurgy. But we had significant advantages. Our homeworld lacks significant predators, our climate is stable, and our social structure naturally promotes cooperative development. Jake leaned back in his chair. Our homeworld is actively trying to kill us, our climate changes constantly, and our social structure is basically organized chaos. And we still made it to space. Velnara had been quiet for most of the conversation, but now she spoke up. What concerns me is not your technological development. What concerns me is your approach to problem solving. You don't follow logical patterns. Your tactics are unpredictable. Your solutions are, she paused, apparently searching for the right word. Creative? Emma suggested. Terrifying, Velnara said firmly. You approach every challenge as if the rules don't apply to you. And somehow that works.
Jake grinned. That's because the rules usually don't apply to us. We made most of them up ourselves, and we're pretty good at changing them when they stop working. Tommy pulled out his tablet and showed them some of his recent projects. Like this morning, I figured out how to turn a regular coffee maker into a proximity alarm system. Not because I needed a proximity alarm system, but because I was bored and wanted to see if I could do it. You modify technology for entertainment purposes? Zarthok asked. We modify everything for entertainment purposes, Emma said. That's kind of our thing. If something exists, some human has probably tried to make it more interesting, more efficient, or more ridiculous. Usually all three. She pulled up her social media feed, which had been documenting their first contact experience in real time. Speaking of which, your visit has been generating quite a bit of interest. We're up to about 50,000 views on the live stream, and the comments section is, well, it's very human. The comments section was indeed very human, featuring everything from legitimate scientific curiosity to elaborate theories about government conspiracies to detailed discussions about whether Zarthok's armor would be protective in a zombie apocalypse scenario. Your species publicly broadcasts first contact events? Velnara asked. We publicly broadcast everything, Jake said. Cooking shows, political debates, people falling off skateboards, cats being adorable. If it happens and someone has a camera, it's probably on the internet within 5 minutes. The internet? Emma spent the next 20 minutes explaining social media, which required additional time to explain the concept of viral videos, but which led to a lengthy discussion about human information sharing patterns that left both aliens looking like they needed to lie down in a quiet room. Let me understand this correctly, Velnara said finally. Your species has created a global communication network that allows any individual to instantly share information, opinions, or entertainment with potentially millions of other individuals. Pretty much, yeah. And you use this network primarily for, what did you call them, cat videos? Us and arguing about politics. Don't forget arguing about politics. Zarthok was frantically updating his reports. This explains several anomalies in our intelligence data. We assumed your rapid technological development indicated a highly organized, centrally directed civilization. Nope, Tommy said cheerfully. We're basically winging it on a planetary scale. It's working pretty well so far, considering. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the visitor center, Emma finished compiling her notes and turned to address their guests directly. Commander Zarthok, I think we need to discuss your species expansion plans. Because based on our conversations today, I suspect your intelligence reports about Earth might be missing some crucial information. Velnara's expression was carefully neutral. What kind of information? The kind that explains why a planet full of supposedly primitive mammals has never been successfully invaded, despite being apparently defenseless and resource-rich. Jake leaned forward. See, here's the thing about humans. We're not actually the apex predators on our planet because we're the biggest or the strongest or the most heavily armed. We're apex predators because we're the most stubborn, creative, and spite-driven species that evolution ever produced. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. Plus, we really don't like being told what to do. Especially by people who show up uninvited and start making threats. Your species' entire approach to conquest appears to be based on fighting predictable opponents, Emma observed. But humans aren't predictable. We're adaptive. We don't have a standard response to threats because we don't have standard threats. Zarthok was beginning to understand the magnitude of the Dominion Empire's miscalculation. You're saying that Earth wasn't classified as a restricted zone because you lack the ability to defend yourselves. We're saying Earth was classified as a restricted zone because anyone who's ever tried to conquer us has learned very quickly that we're more trouble than we're worth, Jake said with a grin that would have been perfectly at home on a shark. Emma pulled up another file on her laptop. I've been doing some research on galactic politics while you two were having your extended camping experience. Turns out humans have quite a reputation out there. We're apparently known as the species that weaponizes everything and the ones who never surrender, even when they probably should. Also, Tommy added, according to the Deep Space Monitoring Station that definitely doesn't exist and I definitely didn't hack into, we're listed in several alien databases as do not engage unless absolutely necessary and recommend extreme caution when approaching. Velnara stared at them. You have deep space monitoring capabilities? We have, Tommy, Jake said. Same thing, really. As the evening settled around them, Zarthok found himself in the unprecedented position of actually liking the creatures he'd originally planned to hunt. They were strange, unpredictable, and operated according to logic patterns that made no sense, but they were also generous, curious, and surprisingly kind to confused alien visitors. What will you report to your superiors? Emma asked. Zarthok considered this carefully. I will report that Earth's dominant species has been significantly underestimated. I will recommend immediate reclassification to Class 1 extreme threat and suggest that all future contact be conducted through proper diplomatic channels. Class 1? Velnara looked surprised. That classification is reserved for species capable of interstellar warfare. Commander, these humans defeated us using camping equipment and aggressive hospitality. They turned our own hunting instincts against us and made us afraid of a planet full of creatures that consider interdimensional tourism a recreational activity. If that's not Class 1 threat material, I don't know what is. Jake stood up and stretched, looking out at the darkening forest where tomorrow he'd go back to his normal routine of cleaning up after tourists and explaining to grown adults why they shouldn't try to pet the wildlife. Well, this has been educational, he said. But I've got to be up early tomorrow. We're expecting a busload of school kids, and someone's got to make sure they don't accidentally declare war on any passing alien species. Emma packed up her notes, already planning the research papers that would come out of this experience. Zarthok, Velnara, you're welcome to stay in touch. I'd love to set up some formal cultural exchange programs once your people finish updating their threat assessments. Tommy was already sketching plans for improvements to his alien proofing systems, because you could never be too prepared, and he'd just gotten some very interesting ideas about advanced materials science. As Zarthok and Velnara prepared to leave, the alien hunter found himself with one final question. Jake, may I ask you something? Sure. During our entire encounter, you never seemed afraid. Even when facing trained killers with advanced weaponry, you remained calm. How? Jake thought about this for a moment, then smiled the kind of smile that had gotten him through 2 decades of dealing with bears, tourists, and federal bureaucracy. Well, Zarthok, here's the thing. I've spent most of my adult life explaining to people why they shouldn't feed marshmallows to grizzly bears, why they can't use the geyser as a hot tub. and why but I saw it on social media isn't a valid excuse for ignoring posted warning signs. After that, a couple of alien hunters with fancy armor and energy weapons is basically just Tuesday. 6 months later, Zarthok's report had become required reading at the Dominion Military Academy. It was titled Tactical Analysis: Why Earth Remains Unconquered, and included 17 appendices, 43 footnotes, and a strongly worded recommendation that all future contact with humans be conducted by trained diplomats rather than military personnel. The report concluded with a personal note. Humans are not apex predators because they are the most dangerous species on their planet. They are apex predators because they have learned to make everything else on their planet more dangerous than they are. Do not underestimate a species that has weaponized their own environment and considers it impossible to be a personal challenge rather than a limitation. Meanwhile, Jake Martinez continued his work as a park ranger, blissfully unaware that he was now considered one of the most dangerous humans in the galaxy by several alien civilizations. His personnel file had been updated to include first contact specialist and interspecies relations expert. But he still spent most of his time cleaning up after tourists and reminding people that bears were not, in fact, oversized dogs. Emma's research on alien psychology had earned her a promotion, several research grants, and a standing invitation to speak at xenobiology conferences across the galaxy. She still jogged past the visitor center every morning, but now she carried a tablet specifically designed to document any additional alien encounters. Tommy had parlayed his alien-proofing innovations into a lucrative side business providing security consulting to government agencies that were very interested in his theories about defensive engineering through creative chaos. He still maintained the park's equipment, but now his maintenance shed was classified as a strategic research facility. And somewhere in deep space, Zarthok had found a new calling as a cultural liaison specialist, helping other species avoid the kinds of mistakes that had turned his simple hunting expedition into an extended lesson in human psychology. He often told other aliens about his experience on Earth, usually ending his presentations with the same warning that never assume that a species is harmless just because they seem friendly. Humans will offer you coffee, ask about your family, and then casually demonstrate why their planet has remained unconquered for its entire history. They are not cruel, but they are absolutely, unquestionably, the most creatively dangerous species in the known galaxy. And that, as humans would say, is how a predator learned the word fear, not through violence or conquest, but through the terrifying realization that sometimes the most dangerous prey is the kind that invites you to sit down, have a snack, and really think about whether hunting them was such a good idea after all.